You want to know what's insane? How one stupid comment at a birthday party can absolutely destroy everything you thought you had. I'm Vanessa. I'm 32, and I need to tell you about the day my husband Derek decided to take me seriously when I said we weren't actually married. Spoiler alert, turns out he was paying way closer attention than I ever realized. Okay, so I need to be completely honest with you about something. Derek and I had been married for 4 years, and I felt like I was drowning. Not in some beautiful, tragic way, just literally suffocating under his constant need for reassurance and connection. This guy used to be a complete playboy before we got together, hooking up left and right, leaving broken hearts everywhere. Then he met me and suddenly transformed into this model husband like he was trying to make up for every bad thing he'd ever done. It was absolutely draining. Every single morning he'd ask about my schedule for the day. Every evening he'd want all the details about my work, who I spoke with, what I ate. When I arranged weekend plans with my girlfriends, he'd get this wounded expression like I was rejecting him. Heaven help me if I came home after 11 without sending him updates. He'd be waiting when I walked in with this sad dog look, asking if I enjoyed myself, if any guys were around, if I needed anything from him. I started pushing limits because I desperately needed space to exist. I'd schedule dinner reservations without saying anything until I was literally heading out. I'd spend entire afternoons shopping with my phone off. I'd plan girls' weekends and inform him about them maybe 24 hours before departure. Every time he'd get this expression like I'd physically hurt him, but he wouldn't directly confront me about it. Just these passive comments about how marriage meant being a team, how he liked knowing I was okay, how he wished we spent more quality time together. The absolute worst part, he was constantly so freaking understanding about everything. I know you need independence, sweetheart. I just get concerned sometimes. Or, I'm probably being too attached. It's just because I care about you so much. It made me feel like the villain for wanting normal personal freedom, which only increased my frustration. Between you and me, I started hating literally everything about him. The way he'd choose clothes that complemented what I was wearing. How he'd propose carpooling to events like we were permanently attached. The way his whole face would brighten when I entered a room like I was some trophy he'd earned. I'd find myself rolling my eyes when he'd send me romantic texts during work hours, or when he'd bring home my favorite pastries on his way back from the office. I knew I was being cruel, but I couldn't stop myself. This wasn't the person I'd married. The Derek I fell in love with was self-assured, autonomous, kind of edgy. This current version was needy and anxious, constantly seeking confirmation that I still wanted him, that I wasn't planning to leave. It was like sharing a home with a rescue dog who'd been abandoned before and now couldn't handle me being out of sight. The moment everything exploded was on a Sunday when Michelle invited us over for one of those relaxed afternoon gatherings. You know the kind. Grilled food, drinks, everyone hanging around the patio pretending to be more comfortable than they really are. Derek immediately suggested we drive together, coordinate our outfits, maybe contribute a dish as a married couple. I wanted to lose my mind. I'll take my own car, I told him, snatching my keys, and I'm wearing whatever I feel like. That hurt expression crossed his face again. Okay, no problem. I just thought it could be nice to arrive together. We don't have to do literally everything as a unit, Derek. He nodded like he got it, but I could see him interpreting this as another rejection. Another indication that his wife didn't actually want to be near him. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part of me felt justified. Maybe if he experienced enough of these moments, he'd finally back off and give me room to breathe. At Michelle's place, I deliberately socialized separately from him. I chatted with Kevin about his career change, laughed at Brittany's stories about her nightmare dates, even engaged in some light flirting with this guy I'd never met who was in town visiting. Nothing inappropriate, just appreciating attention from someone who wasn't analyzing my every expression and mood. Derek hung out by the food with the other men, drinking his beer, occasionally looking over at me with that same wounded face. I could practically read his mind. Why doesn't she want to be near me? Why is she talking to that stranger? What did I mess up now? Here's the thing. I'd been secretly planning this girl's trip for literally weeks. Nashville, 4 days, just my friends and me having fun. I'd made reservations, taken vacation days, bought new clothes, everything. But I hadn't told Derek yet because I knew he'd have all these questions. Inquiries about our accommodations, who was attending, what our itinerary looked like. He'd want to take me to the airport, be there when I returned, probably message me constantly while I was gone. So when Brittany mentioned it in front of the whole group, I just casually said, "Yeah, I can't wait." Leaving Thursday afternoon, back Sunday evening. That's when Derek spoke up from across the patio. "Hold on, what? You're traveling somewhere this week?" The way he said it, not hostile, just bewildered and slightly wounded, made something inside me snap. Here we were, surrounded by our entire friend group, and he was going to make me look like some wife who needed authorization to take a trip. Like I was required to provide him with a complete breakdown of my existence. "I'm going to Nashville with my friends," I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just a girls' weekend?" "Oh," Derek set down his beer, looking genuinely puzzled. "I had no idea you were planning a trip. Were you planning to mention it to me?" And that's when I completely lost it. The way he phrased it, so rational and injured, like I was some horrible wife for not clearing my personal plans with him, like I required his permission to live my own life. "Stop acting like we're married." The words came out harsher than I'd planned, slicing through all the patio conversations like a blade. "You don't have authority over where I go or who I spend time with." The entire party went absolutely silent. Kevin stopped talking mid-word. Michelle froze with a drink halfway to her lips. Even someone's kid stopped crying. Every single person on that patio was staring at us, and I could feel my face burning with humiliation and rage. But you know what? I wasn't apologetic. I was exhausted from walking on eggshells around Derek's emotions. Exhausted from being guilt-tripped for wanting personal autonomy. If everyone wanted to judge me for refusing to be dominated by my own husband, that was their issue to deal with. The silence felt eternal. Then someone, I think it was Kevin, let out this small snort of amusement. Then another person chuckled quietly. Soon about half the party was trying to conceal their smirks behind their glasses, obviously entertained by the spectacle of watching a husband get publicly humiliated by his own wife. I felt validated. Finally, people could witness what I'd been dealing with. Derek standing there looking shocked and devastated like he couldn't fathom his wife would dare address him that way in public. The pitiful, confused husband who just wanted to know his wife's whereabouts. Give me a break. But then Derek did something completely unexpected. Instead of getting defensive or embarrassed, instead of apologizing like he normally did when I snapped at him, he smiled. Not a hurt smile or a forced smile, but this serene, almost entertained expression I'd never witnessed before. "You're completely correct," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed patio. "We're not married." The laughter stopped instantly. Everyone froze, including me. What the hell did that even mean? Derek turned to Michelle, lifting his beer in this casual gesture. "Thanks for hosting. I'm going to head out now." Then he looked back at me with that same strangely calm smile. "Enjoy your weekend trip. Take whatever time you need to reflect." He walked to his vehicle like nothing unusual had occurred, climbed in, and drove off just like that. No argument, no scene, no pleading for an apology. He simply left. I stood there on Michelle's patio, suddenly feeling like I was the one who'd been caught off guard. Around me, people were beginning to whisper, giving me looks that weren't sympathetic anymore. They appeared confused, maybe even somewhat impressed by Derek's response. "That was unexpected," Brittany said quietly. Michelle was staring at me like she was seeing me with fresh eyes. "Vanessa, what just happened?" I didn't know how to respond. I'd gotten precisely what I wanted. Derek backing away, providing space, ending the clingy husband act. So why did I feel like something had gone catastrophically wrong? I spent the remainder of the party attempting to seem normal, but everyone kept giving me these strange looks. The guy I'd been flirting with earlier suddenly seemed less interested in conversation. People's discussions would halt when I approached, then resume once I'd moved away. By the time I arrived home that night, my phone had been buzzing constantly. Messages from Derek that I ignored, assuming they were the typical apologies and explanations. Texts from friends asking if I was all right, if Derek was all right, what that entire situation at the party was about. I powered off my phone and went to sleep, telling myself I'd handle it all tomorrow. Derek would settle down, probably apologize for creating drama, and everything would return to normal. Maybe he'd finally comprehend that I needed independence. that his constant hovering was suffocating me. I was completely wrong about everything. Nashville was incredible. 4 days of complete freedom, nobody questioning where I was heading or when I'd return. No guilt trips about insufficient communication or staying out late. Just my friends and me living without having to justify ourselves to anyone. I ignored Derek's calls and messages the entire trip. Whatever he wanted to express, whatever apology or justification he'd prepared, could wait until I got back. I was finished being made to feel guilty for wanting basic autonomy in my own marriage. The flight home Sunday night was peaceful. I felt refreshed, vindicated, ready to have a genuine discussion with Derek about boundaries and mutual respect. Maybe his dramatic exit from the party had been beneficial for both of us. Maybe he'd finally understand that marriage didn't equal possession. I arrived at our driveway around 10 p.m., already planning my opening statement. Something about how the weekend had given me clarity, how we needed to work on respecting each other's independence, how his reaction at the party had been immature but perhaps necessary. My key wouldn't function. I stood there on our front steps, trying the lock repeatedly. Maybe I was just exhausted and doing it incorrectly. But regardless of how I manipulated it, rotated it, the lock wouldn't open. It was like the key belonged to an entirely different residence. That's when I saw the boxes. Our entire front yard was covered with cardboard containers, all systematically organized under a green tarp. My boxes, my clothing, my books, my cosmetics, my accessories, everything I possessed packaged up like some kind of structured garage sale. "What the hell?" I said aloud, staring at the bizarre scene. The front door opened and Derek appeared. He looked different, calmer, more composed than I'd seen him in months. He was holding a beer and wearing this expression I couldn't interpret. "All your belongings are there," he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. "I made sure everything was packed properly. Nothing's broken." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what I was witnessing. "Derek, what is this? Why are my things on the lawn?" "Your possessions are where they should be," he said, "on the property of someone who wants to be single." "What are you talking about? Why doesn't my key work?" "Why would your key work? You don't live here anymore." The casual way he stated it, like he was clarifying something obvious to a confused person, made my stomach drop. This wasn't Derek having a tantrum or making a dramatic statement. This was something else completely. "You can't just evict me," I said, my voice beginning to tremble. "This is my home, too." "Actually," Derek said, taking a sip of his beer, "this house belongs to someone who believes in marriage. You made it extremely clear you're not that person." Before I could respond, our neighbor Patricia emerged from across the street. She had this sympathetic look on her face like she was approaching a stray animal. "Excuse me, dear," she called out. "Are you looking for your husband?" "Yes," I said, gesturing frantically at Derek. "He's lost his mind and locked me out of my own house." Patricia smiled with the kind of patient look reserved for explaining obvious things to confused individuals. "Oh, honey, your ex-husband told me you wanted to be single. He said you made that extremely clear to everyone at the party Sunday." Ex-husband. The word struck me like a physical impact. I spun back toward Derek, who was observing this exchange with that same disturbingly calm expression. "Ex-husband? We're not getting divorced. This is insane." Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Process server came by yesterday. Left this for you." My hands were shaking as I unfolded the papers. Divorce petition filed by Derek against Vanessa. Irreconcilable differences. I scanned the first page, then the second, my heart racing as the reality of what I was reading penetrated. "You filed for divorce without even discussing it with me first?" "I did discuss it with you," Derek said. "You told me to stop acting like we're married because I don't have authority over your life. I followed your advice." "That's not what I meant." "That's precisely what you meant, and you said it in front of 20 witnesses. I looked around desperately, hoping someone would support me, tell Derek he was being irrational and overreacting. But Patricia was still standing there with her arms folded, watching the drama develop like it was her favorite television program. 2 other neighbors had materialized on their porches, clearly enjoying the free entertainment. "You can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "This is crazy. I was just frustrated about something stupid. People say things they don't mean when they're upset." Derek finished his beer and placed the empty bottle on the porch rail. "You weren't upset Sunday. You were making a statement, a very clear, very public statement about what you think of our marriage. But I love you." The words hung in the air between us, sounding hollow even to my own ears. 4 days ago they might have carried weight. 4 days ago Derek might have been desperate enough to believe them. Now they just sounded like exactly what they were. A last-ditch attempt to avoid consequences. Derek laughed, and the sound was colder than I'd ever heard from him. "You love having someone around to blame for your issues. You love having someone to treat like a roommate who occasionally steps out of line. That's not the same thing." I tried stepping closer, letting tears form in my eyes. "Please, can we just go inside and discuss this like mature adults?" "Mature adults don't humiliate their spouses in public," Derek said. "Mature adults don't announce to a crowd that their marriage is meaningless. Mature adults don't spend 4 days ignoring their husband's calls and texts after creating a scene." I needed space to think. Well, congratulations. You've got all the space you ever wanted. I stood there in the driveway, looking back and forth between Derek and my possessions scattered across the lawn. The confident woman who had declared our marriage meaningless in front of our friends was gone, replaced by someone who was finally beginning to understand that actions have consequences. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked quietly. Derek shrugged. "Same place you were planning to go when you told everyone we weren't married. Same place you were planning to go when you decided you didn't need to consider my perspective about anything." Patricia cleared her throat from across the street. "Dear, there's a decent extended stay motel about 15 minutes down the interstate. Very affordable rates for people in transition." The look I gave her must have been pure venom, because she actually stepped backward. Even the neighbors had turned against me. "This isn't over," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling my attorney." "Excellent idea," Derek replied. "Tell them to contact Richardson and Partners. They'll handle all the arrangements." As I scrolled through my contacts with trembling fingers, Derek walked back toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear him beginning to make phone calls, probably to friends who'd witnessed Sunday's performance and would have difficulty understanding why they should be sympathetic now. He paused at the door and looked back one more time. I was standing in the middle of my belongings, phone pressed to my ear, looking exactly like what I'd claimed I wanted to be: single. The next 4 weeks were a nightmare I hadn't anticipated. My attorney, when I finally located one willing to accept my case, examined the divorce papers and delivered the worst possible news. "He's documented everything," she said, spreading Derek's evidence across her desk like she was revealing a losing hand. "Months of text messages where you dismiss marriage as meaningless. Screenshots of social media posts where you complain about feeling trapped. And 20 witnesses to your public declaration that you're not really married." "That was just one argument," I protested. "People say things they don't mean when they're upset." "Mrs. Thompson, your husband's attorney has constructed a case demonstrating a clear pattern of you rejecting marital obligations and repeatedly stating that you don't consider yourself bound by marriage vows. In legal terms, this is called an admission against interest." I stared at the evidence of my own words, seeing them in a different light now. Text messages I'd sent during fights, Instagram posts I'd made after girls' nights out, casual comments I'd made to friends, all of it creating a picture of someone who viewed marriage as a burden rather than a commitment. "What about spousal support?" I asked desperately. "I sacrificed 4 years of my life for this marriage." My attorney shook her head. "You repeatedly stated that marriage was just paperwork. The court isn't likely to award spousal support to someone who has consistently argued that marriage has no real meaning or value." The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd imagined possible. Turns out when you spend months creating documentation of how little you value your marriage, there isn't much left to dispute in court. Derek's attorney presented my own words back to me like evidence in a criminal case. Every dismissive text, every eye roll captured on someone's phone camera, every public comment about feeling suffocated by marriage, it all came back to destroy me. The worst part was watching Derek in court. He sat there appearing calm and rational, like the reasonable party in an unreasonable situation. When his attorney asked him to describe our relationship, he spoke about attempting to be a good husband, wanting to spend time together, asking basic questions about my plans and whereabouts. I thought marriage meant being partners, he said quietly. But my wife made it clear she viewed my interest in her life as controlling behavior. She repeatedly told me that marriage was just paperwork and that she valued her independence more than our commitment to each other. When it was my turn to speak, everything I said sounded defensive and immature. I tried to explain that I'd just been feeling suffocated, that Derek had been too clingy, that I'd needed space to breathe. But next to his calm, documented account of events, I sounded like exactly what I was. Someone who'd taken a good man's love for granted, and then blamed him when he stopped offering it. The judge barely deliberated. "Mrs. Thompson, you've repeatedly stated both privately and publicly that you don't consider marriage to be a meaningful commitment. This court sees no reason to treat your brief union as anything more significant than you yourself have claimed it to be. No spousal support, no claim to the house Derek had owned before we married, no shared assets beyond what I'd brought into the marriage myself. I walked out of that courthouse with exactly what I'd claimed to want: complete independence. It felt nothing like I'd imagined it would. Moving into the extended stay motel Patricia had recommended was humiliating enough, but the real punishment came from our social circle. I'd expected people to be sympathetic, to understand that Derek had overreacted to one argument. Instead, I found myself completely isolated. Michelle stopped returning my calls. Brittany made excuses every time I suggested meeting up. Even casual acquaintances seemed to have heard the story and formed their opinions about who was in the wrong. The few conversations I managed to have were devastating. "Vanessa, we all saw what happened," Michelle finally told me when I cornered her at the supermarket. "You publicly humiliated your husband for asking a reasonable question, then spent 4 days ignoring him. What did you expect him to do?" "I expected him to act like an adult and talk to me about it." "He tried talking to you for months. We all watched him try. You shut him down every time." I wanted to argue, to explain my side, but the more I reflected on it, the more I realized she was right. Derek had tried to talk to me about feeling disconnected, about wanting to spend more time together, about his concerns that I was pulling away. I'd dismissed every attempt as neediness or insecurity. The worst part was discovering that I'd become some kind of cautionary tale. Women in our social circle were using my story as an example of how not to treat a good man. I overheard conversations at coffee shops, at the gym, at work. Women discussing how refreshing it was to see a man who knew his worth, who wouldn't tolerate disrespect even from his own wife. "Did you hear about Vanessa and Derek?" I heard one woman say at the office break room. "She treated him like garbage for months, then got shocked when he actually left her. I mean, good for him, right? About time a man stood up for himself." I'd become the villain in my own story, and the worst part was that I was starting to see why. My dating life was non-existent. Word had spread about how I treated my husband, and apparently that was a red flag for most decent men. The few dates I managed to get were disasters. Either guys who'd heard the story and wanted to lecture me about respect, or losers who thought my reputation meant I was desperate enough to settle for anything. Meanwhile, Derek seemed to be thriving. I'd see him around town looking healthier, more confident, like a burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He'd lost the hurt, anxious expression that had become his default around me. Instead, he looked like the man I'd originally fallen for, self-assured and content. 5 months after our divorce was finalized, I was sitting in a downtown coffee shop when I saw them together. Derek and Jessica, a woman from our former social circle who I'd never paid much attention to. They were at a corner table holding hands and laughing about something on his phone. I watched them for a full 15 minutes, studying their interaction. Jessica looked at Derek the way I never had, with genuine affection and respect. She listened when he talked, smiled at his jokes, touched his arm when she made a point. It was clear she actually enjoyed his company, valued his opinions, wanted to be there with him. Derek looked completely relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. He was animated, confident, clearly comfortable in his own skin. This was the man I'd married before I'd spent 4 years grinding down his self-esteem with constant rejection and dismissal. They looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way that Derek and I never had been, even in our best moments. I felt something twist in my chest watching them. Not jealousy exactly, but a sick recognition of what I'd thrown away. Derek wasn't some clingy, insecure man who needed too much attention. He was someone who wanted to be in a real partnership, who valued connection and communication and shared experiences. All the things I'd found suffocating were exactly what Jessica seemed to treasure about him. I stood up to leave, but Derek spotted me across the coffee shop. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that hit me harder than anger or hurt would have. Indifference. He looked at me the way you'd look at a stranger, with mild recognition but no emotional investment. Then he turned back to Jessica, dismissing me completely. I was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. I was just someone he used to know, someone who'd taught him what he didn't want in a relationship. Walking back to my car, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just Derek, but the chance to be loved by someone who'd actually tried to love me. I'd had a man who wanted to build a life with me, who valued my presence in his world, who thought I was worth fighting for. And I'd thrown it all away because I was too selfish and immature to appreciate what I had. The really sick part, even now, even seeing how much better off Derek was without me, I couldn't bring myself to admit I'd been completely wrong. Part of me still believed he'd been too sensitive, too needy, too quick to give up on us. But sitting in my car outside that coffee shop, watching through the window as Derek and Jessica shared what looked like the kind of easy, comfortable intimacy I'd never allowed us to have, I finally had to face the truth. I'd gotten exactly what I'd asked for. I was single, independent, free to do whatever I wanted without answering to anyone. And I was miserable. The independence I'd craved felt empty and meaningless. The space I demanded felt like isolation. The freedom I'd fought for felt like punishment. Derek had given me everything I'd claimed to want, and it turned out I'd never actually wanted any of it. I just wanted to hurt him, to prove I had power over him, to make him pay for loving me more than I'd been willing to love him back. Now he was happy with someone who actually deserved him, and I was alone with the consequences of my own choices. The worst part? I still couldn't bring myself to fully admit I'd been wrong. Even facing the wreckage of my own making, part of me wanted to blame Derek for giving up too easily, for not fighting harder for our marriage, for finding someone new so quickly. But deep down, in the part of myself I tried not to examine too closely, I knew the truth. I destroyed something good because I was too broken to recognize its value, and now I had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. Derek had won. He'd found happiness, respect, and love with someone who appreciated what he had to offer, and I had exactly what I demanded.